All right. Just checking to make sure it's all working. Hello, everybody. Let me make sure we're online here. All right, very good. We are on. All right. Hello, everybody. Hey, Ed Dodge here. Another episode of Goddess Bible Study. We're here with Lisa Adams and my new friend Joshua Vanderplant, and Tony G just showed up. And Michael. Great. We got two people hopping in.
Hey there.
All right. We got Michael and Tony G. Hello, guys. Somebody might have some audio going on in the background there. One of you guys.
I'll hit mute. I'm in the car.
Okay, yeah. All right, hi, Tony. And hello, Michael. How you doing?
I'm well. Good to be here. Hi, Lisa.
Oh, you guys know each other? All right, very good. Small world here in Virginia. All right, so I think we'll jump in. We're gonna people can hop in and comment whenever you want. Feel free to ask questions or interrupt. I'm just gonna jump into the story here. This is actually one of my favorite Bible stories, and this is one of the ones that when I first started doing this goddess stuff a couple years ago and started breaking into my Bible for the first time since high school, this is one of the stories that totally leaped out to me when I learned that it's translated as the Qedesha, that I didn't know anything about it because I'd heard this story. They say she's a prostitute, and it's one of these stories that is like because from Sunday school as a kid, and it's one of these stories that's kind of embarrassing. You know, there's a whole series of embarrassing stories that they try to whip over quick in normal Bible study in the Christian churches, and this is one of them for sure. And we're going to hit all of them over the course of Goddess Bible Study. We are going to hit every single of the most embarrassing stories in the Bible that the Christians have the most trouble with. Wherever it's that you think sexual or anything like that. But this is the highlight. So this is the story of Judah and Tamar. So this is still during the time of the patriarchs. We're still in the time period of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so Jacob has 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. Judah is one of the sons. They're still in Canaan. They haven't gone into Egypt yet. So we're still very early in the biblical narrative. In fact, it's Judah's brother, one of the 12 brothers, is also Joseph, and he's the famous character with the coat of many colors who goes to Egypt and is with the Pharaoh. That's the brother of Judah, and that's another part of the story. But this part of the story is where so Judah is going to become the patriarch of the tribe of Judah, which is what in the Bible becomes the nation of Judah, and that's where Jerusalem is. And that's where King David and King Solomon, they're all from the tribe of Judah, and they live in the nation of Judah. And there was two countries in the Old Testament, Israel and Judah. So the Yahwists come from Judah. So this is a very important patriarchal line. And the child is born of this daughter-in-law who pretends to be a prostitute to get impregnated by him. And it's a very unusual story. And so the idea is that there is this law. So this is one thing I've talked about here on Goddess Bible Study is how there is a matriarchal and patriarchal families are coexisting and living next to each other in the Bronze Age. The matriarchies were the old default of the tribal matriarchies, and then kingship and patriarchy are coming and imposing themselves. And it plays out over a long period of time. But so for over the course of a couple thousand years in the Bronze Age, matriarchal families and patriarchal families are coexisting. And so this is a patriarchal family, and this is a sign of what happens when a woman goes and lives in a patriarchal household, is that if she doesn't have a child, she's kind of screwed. And so they had a law back in these days, and this is from the Bible. It's called a levirate marriage. And it says, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. So the idea is if she's a widow, then the brother-in-law is supposed to impregnate her. And so that's what happens to Tamar. So we'll just read the story. It's very quick. Anyone have any comments before I jump into the story? All right, I'll jump in. All right. So Judah got a wife for her firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord, we're talking about Yahweh, put him to death. And then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. There's a term that comes from this. It's called onanism, which is like an old-fashioned term for having sex with a woman and, spilling your seed on the floor. They call that onanism, and that's like an old-fashioned term that comes from this story.
So here's where I'm like, okay, what he did was wicked, and something did was wicked, or whatever. And so we've got this punishing Lord Yahweh, right, who comes in to be like, well, you're wicked, but we don't know exactly what wicked is, other than, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm just not a big fan of Yahweh, but
no, I hear you. Me neither. That's why I like the idea that El and Yahweh are two separate gods, and I can focus on El Elyon and kick Yahweh to the curb. So Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household, not mother's household. That's a patriarchal family, until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers." So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adulamite went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," which sounds like a euphemism, but I think there was actually a sheep shearing festival, apparently. I don't know. She took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enam, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that, though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute. And now they use the word zona here, which is the Hebrew word for a common, just like a brothel prostitute, not a sacred woman, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. Now, this is a time period where they don't have money, and everything is barter. Money doesn't get invented until the Iron Age, so everything is barter in those days. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the Qedesha who was beside the road to Enam?" Now, Qedesha is translated as shrine prostitute or temple prostitute or cult prostitute, depending on which translation, but they specifically use the word Qedesha. And then they use it 2 more times. "There hasn't been any Qedesha here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any Qedesha here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out here and have her burned to death." Sounds pretty harsh. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah," and he did not sleep with her again. That is Genesis 38, 6-26. So that's the whole story. And so, yeah, it says a lot about Bronze Age marriages, and the main thing is just that it's identifying these Qedesha, which get translated as temple prostitutes, not as the holy ones, which is what the name means. The word Qedesha means holy ones, and they were sacred across the Near East. So we can dive into that, but anyone have anything to say? All right. Well, I will just jump into just the rest of what I prepared about the. We're actually going to make this a 2-week topic. I'm going to do more next week. That's a deeper dive into some of the Babylonian and Mesopotamian free women. Some of the modern scholarship is revealing that, as these matriarchal and patriarchal families coexisted, you can identify the matriarchal families. They're called mothers' households. And there's women adopting women, adopting daughters. There's a whole class of women that have names and specific names. Some of them are sacred and some of them are secular. The Qedesha are just one of the whole variety of different women. They happen to be the priestesses. And these women have independent sex lives. And so in the translations and the traditional Christian scholarship from the last few centuries, they uniformly get translated as prostitutes or whores. Like all the scholarship, all the time, always says they're all been prostitutes. And it's not until you go back to the original language and translate it yourself and try and deduce what's really going on, you see that life was a lot more complicated back then. And they're mostly being, insulted. So anyway, the Qedesha, who are also called the Qeditsu in the Sumerian texts, were a class of priestesses or hierodules, and the Qedesh were their male counterparts who are transgender or eunuchs. And I'm going to do a whole separate topic one night on the eunuch trans servants of the mother goddess who are in the Bible and who are all over the place. But that's another topic for another night. So the hierodule is the physical embodiment of the goddess herself, and they were prominent in goddess temples throughout the ancient Near East for thousands of years. The Qedesha were known as the holy ones, virgins, or the set apart, which spoke to their respected spiritual purity, and virgins, which referred to their autonomous unmarried status. It's another important translation from ancient life to now. They use the word virgin all over the place in the ancient world. It does not mean a girl who's never had sex. It means a girl who's unmarried and independent. It's a young maiden, a young unmarried maiden. Has nothing to do with her sexual history. And this totally gets lost in translation from ancient world to, Western culture. We totally miss that, there were independent women running around. So the Qedesha are mysterious and intriguing. They're an enigma. Our imagination's fueled by vague biblical mentions. The biblical writers clearly intend a sexual connotation, and for 2,500 years, people have believed in the existence of these sacred harlots. But there's actually a lot of uncertainty about temple prostitution, as there are no written examples that confirm any kind of ritual copulation prescribed for people. And some critical scholars don't believe cult prostitution ever even existed. The evidence is all really quite ambiguous when you really dive into it. I personally think there's plenty of sacred sex going on, but it's true that they don't have written descriptions of like sex rituals per se. Not from this era. We do know though that early Bronze Age Mesopotamian cultures, we're talking the Sumerians, the Assyrians, they were openly sexual and celebrated it, while later Iron Age cultures were much more restrictive of the women. And that's exactly the shift we observe in the Bible among the Israelites, which is what we're talking about in Goddess Bible Study. We also know for certain that brothel districts were common in the neighborhoods around goddess temples throughout like the Greek and Roman world. We know about it because the Christians brag about how they went and shut them all down when the Christian reformers came in under Constantine. They talk about how they shut down the brothels. And we have lots of attestation that these temples did in fact earn income from the brothels in the neighborhood that would tithe some of their income or however they made it work. But we do know this is common. So there were entire classes of respectable free women in Mesopotamian society, not only Qedesha, though most of them are described as prostitutes in traditional scholarship. And it's only in the most recent generation that people have gotten past this insulting characterization and revealed the depths and variety of independent women. Qedesha, Naditu is another one. And other consecrated women had special protections under law in Mesopotamian society. They lived together in the temple where they attended school and were trained in the arts and given special privileges and responsibilities. Qedesha could be married, while Harimtu were explicitly not married. The Qedesha were mystical women, healers and midwives. Like we have attestations of this. They were healers and midwives, sorceresses, prophetesses, and oracles. The Qedesha were known for their charity and powers of divination and prophecy, and they were among the most respected and mysterious women in Mesopotamian society. They're documented to be midwives and wet nurses. They made lotions, ointments, perfumes, and incense. And as midwives, they helped women through pregnancy and childbirth. Abortions by means of herbal medicine were available if needed, and women tracked their fertility cycles. And women, generally speaking, were in control of their own cycles of life and pregnancy, although they also had high birth rates and high child mortality. It was a women's choice to become a Qedesha, and it seems to have been a calling. A father could not refuse his unmarried daughter's request to serve the goddess, and the Qedesha were free to leave the service of the temple at any time. There was no shame or scandal for serving in the temple, and children born from the service belonged to their mothers. These children were then known as virgin born, and they are seen widely in myth and legend. Virgin born is like a cultural concept, existed long before the Christians co-opted it. And there's lots of legendary figures who are said to have been virgin born. Helen of Troy, Sargon of Akkad, many other important figures from legends are said to have been born of the gods with no scandal to the husbands. The Qedesha's, Alexander the Great's mother said so about Alexander. The Qedesha's rights and good name were protected under law. They could own and inherit property and were free to return to secular life to marry and have children, though it was said that their independence made them difficult wives. Later on, we will get into the story of the prophet Hosea and Gomer, which is another one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. Him and his wife are exactly this. He's a prophet of Yahweh trying to shut down his wife who's running around being a Qedesha, getting pregnant by other men, and he's unhappy about it, and he tries to shut her down. We will get to that story. It's a really good one. The number of precise references to Kaditsu and Qedesha, where their names are actually used, are quite rare. There's only some 65 references across all of Mesopotamian and biblical literature. So there's a lot that we don't know, but we do know that they existed. And we learn many important details about the Qedesha and Naditu from the law codes of Hammurabi, written in Babylon around 1750 BCE. The devoted woman could inherit property from her father and do with it as she pleased, and she shared with her brothers an equal portion of the father's estate upon passing. This law is 178. This is good. Children born to the Qedeshas inherited the name and property from their mother, and the biological father had no claim over the child. Law 187. Virgin born. This is another good one too. Qedeshas were banned from opening a tavern or even from entering one due to their mastery of mystery potions. The penalty for a Qedesha who opened a tavern was to be burned to death. That is some pretty potent stuff. This is about the end here. The Hebrew prophets and biblical writers condemned the Qedesha and banned the practice from the community as part of the Yahwist Reformation around 600 BC under King Josiah that eventually led to biblical monotheism. They are fighting about the Qedesha all the way through the First Temple period. Qedesha and all independent women were incompatible with biblical patriarchal values, but the mere presence of the ban in the laws of Deuteronomy is an indication that the Qedesha were once a vibrant part of the Israelite community. Next episode, we'll take a deeper dive into the free women and sacred sex. And here it is from Deuteronomy. No Israelite man or woman is to become a Qedesha. That verse actually goes on. It says, you will not bring the wages of a whore or the wages of a dog into Yahweh's temple. I should have gotten the full version of that quote. Because the wages of a dog is the translation for the male Kadesh. They're, again, all super insulting. Calling the eunuchs, calling them dogs. Anyway, that's all I got prepared. The floor is open to any comments from anybody.
Well, and actually, when I read this earlier, I was thinking, where is this information coming from? Like, because there's a lot of talk in, like animist communities, pagan communities, some spiritual communities. There's so much talk. Of course, the Tantra, Neo-Tantra communities, there's a lot of talk about the sacred prostitutes or the temple prostitutes and everything. And it's all talk, but it's really like, I haven't come across any actual texts with, something substantive.
No, that's what I was mentioning before. And that's why a lot of modern, the current crop of critical scholars actually doesn't really agree with me. They will say that all this temple prostitution, we'll talk about this next week. Herodotus has a very famous account of Babylonian women having to serve in the temple and have sex with a stranger at least once in their life. He calls it the foulest of traditions. And so this is a very famous account that has informed people since 500 BC. I mean, Herodotus is the same era as that they're writing the Old Testament. And so a lot of modern scholars think that it's a bullshit, that Herodotus is totally lying and he's totally making it all up. And because Herodotus does make up a lot of stuff and he never did go to Babylon. So he's speaking hearsay. He didn't witness it himself. I think he's speaking to Babylonian reputation. I think there's a reputation of the sexuality, but you're right, Lisa, the scholarship is really controversial over an explicit reference of having sex, of a person named a Qedesha having sex is not named anywhere. And there's a lot of allusions to the sacred marriage, and maybe there's a ritual with the king having sex with a priestess, but there's no actual account that says it. There's no actual account that puts words to it in any of the Babylonian, Mesopotamian literature. Lots of stuff about sacred marriage ceremonies, but no one knows what actually happened. We know the king and the priestess did something.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been talk of like priestesses of Aphrodite who, would lay with men, especially, in different cultures. Like this is all hearsay, right? It's all verbal, oral tradition, maybe, but that men returning from war would go and see the temple prostitutes so that the temple prostitutes could have sex with them and like massage them and bathe them and heal them and do all of these things, and include having intercourse with them, hieros, right? So that the prostitutes themselves were able to take all like the heartache and the difficulty and the violence and all the energy from the man through receiving his energy and receiving his semen and all of that, and transmute that energy such that he could then go home to like his wife and children and his and his land or whatever, and he wouldn't be so like fucked up about it.
So PTSD. Yeah, so I write about that same ritual in the book. What do they call it? The washing the war out of man ritual, something like that.
Which book now?
In my History of the Goddess, I talk about that.
Okay, but I'm like, but where did you find that? That's Yeah,
no, it's the same rumor mill. That is, and I don't know.
Okay.
That is, it's a lot of the stuff is, we'll get it. Like the thing with the Mesopotamian. All right, two comments is the goddess cultures were typically not literate. And so everything that's literate leans patriarchal. And so everything that's written down is always going to lean towards a patriarchal take on things. And all the goddess stuff is all in imagery, and they're not using written word. That's one part of it. Another one is that the Ishtar culture specifically from Babylon is so ultra sexual in her presentations and her liturgies. And this is what we're going to talk about next week. So graphically sexual, and they're so utterly celebrating female sexuality that it's really hard to imagine that these people are prude.
Are you talking about Inanna?
Inanna and Ishtar, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
They are like Ishtar does not get tired. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I have the book. I have the translation. Yeah.
So, and we do know that there were certainly brothels around these temples. But yeah, we don't know we don't know any details about sacred sex except what comes to us through India, and that's not as old. So we can't put a finger on Mesopotamia or Egypt either. Now in Egypt, there's all sorts of graphic images and graphic sexual stuff that again that sort of implies and is evocative of sex. But again, there's nothing that says that specifically lays that out in words that's totally unambiguous. So there's this bit of a debate and there's a bit of a mystery about all of it, and what exactly they were doing. It's what makes it so intriguing. But the fact they call them temple prostitutes, I mean, I don't think they were making that up for no reason.
Well, I mean, look at a lot of Greek art and poetry, and like their plates and their pottery are full of, people fornicating and like orgiastic scenes and things like that. Like, I mean, it's kind of all over the place. I mean, it's very prominent, you know, for back then, of course. So I don't know, like, it would be really nice to get a hold of some real substantive proof, even though, you know, I think there are many of us, and I'm just going to speak on behalf of us, right? Whoever people like me are, who hear this oral, you know, information about sacred prostitutes and you know, these priestesses and everything, and we own that, we feel that within ourselves in a very sort of ancient, sort of primordial way. There's a knowing there and an intuition and a feeling about it. And also because we very much live this path, this similar path in this lifetime. So instead of just, you know, okay, well, we're all talking about it, so it had to be real. I would love to, you know, get my hands on something that's really, you know, more proof, more information, that sort of thing, because it feels like truth in my bones.
I know. I'm with you. It's like there's definitely some missing information, and there's this enigma at the heart of it all. It is because there's a lot of literature about, you know, especially from Greek and the Roman era, like, and the Christians write a lot about criticizing the pagans for doing sexual stuff, but none of it got written down. Like, we just don't see any of it. We don't see it from Sibylle. We do know they did some like pretty blood-soaked rituals in the Sibylle cults in the Roman era. We know about the men castrating themselves to be the Galli priests. That's when that topic comes up, we'll talk about them. And we do know they did these. They would sacrifice animals like on a rack above your head, so that all the blood and guts all pour down all over you. Like, there's some pretty gnarly rituals. And the Christians accuse them of doing a lot of sexual stuff, but, you know, just didn't get written down. We just don't know. And maybe that was part of it. Maybe part of it was not to be written down. And I'm not taken a deep dive into the Tantra stuff, like the modern India Tantra stuff. And I don't really know how far it goes or what the legacy of it is, really. I know that's wrapped up in it, but there's a time gap there between them that it's hard to make the causal connection. But I think these traditions have always been around, frankly.
I do too, because there's so many common threads between older, like ancient civilizations and tribal communities. There's so many common threads among all of them that it's like they were all thinking and believing kind of the same thing, but they just had like different cosmology to explain it.
And we know that the like old Sumerian cultures were super sexual, that they celebrated sex, that having sex in the streets was like totally normative and celebrated, and that we know they had prostitution. Like, we have like advertisements of women like listing their wages and stuff and where to meet me. So but it's just not sacred, right? We have secular prostitution for sure. And we have all the sexual associations with the various goddesses, but yeah, it's like the actual ritual. Boy, we'd like to. So,
I'll chime in here just a second. I don't think we can underestimate possibly just the intentional book burning or parchment burning or whatever you would want to call it of the past that tried to eradicate any trace of this. I mean, we see what they did with what within the Orthodox churches, the organized official churches, how they would suppress or burn heretical works, and that there were canons about holding on to those heretical works. So really doesn't surprise me that these things would be eradicated from the historical record, although I think it won't surprise me either if we don't find these sources in time dug up here and there as we continue to research these things.
I mean, the Library of Alexandria.
Alexandria.
Right. And of course, not just the killing of, millions of people, but, the how they've tried to eradicate so much, like from the pagans, really, the Cathars, like what they did to so many people.
Oh, absolutely. There's tons of like cultural genocide and very intentional. It's been, people have been doing it for a long time. We did it to the Native Americans. They did it to the pagans in the, in the Roman era. Real violent stuff, under Constantine, they talk about, smashing the temple of Venus that was in Baalbek, what is today called Baalbek in Lebanon, but then it was Heliopolis. And in Baalbek, they have one of the most fabulous temple sites of the whole ancient world. It's there's 3 temples there. There's a temple to Jupiter, temple to Dionysus, and a temple to Venus. And the Jupiter temple has got the trilithon, these 3 megalithic stones, the 3 biggest stones that have ever been cut and moved by humanity. If you guys have not seen these 3 enormous rocks, they're as big as like 900 tons a piece. They're bigger than a city bus. And they're the biggest cut stones ever been moved by any human beings ever in history. And there's 3 of them next to each other, and they were moved like a mile away from the quarries, like a mile away. And then they're elevated like 30 feet in the air because they're not even on the lowest setting in the foundation. They're raised up a couple of us. Anyway, that's a very ancient, highly historical, very important sacred site. And, the Romans didn't build that site. They built on top of it. And then later on, under Constantine, he talks about going there and shutting down the Temple of Venus and all of the den of iniquity and all of the, unholy stuff that was going on in the Temple of Venus. But they specifically talk about the Temple of Venus there in today's Baalbek. So, I mean, they were doing, I don't know. We don't know what they were doing what the drugs they were doing in the mystery religions either. It's all pretty mysterious.
Yeah. Ed, I've got a question. If we can go back to the text in Genesis here, where they used 2 different words for prostitute. Obviously, the one for the sacred prostitute, and the other one initially they were
Zona, Zona and Qedesha.
Earlier, you didn't read this part, but earlier in the chapter, it talks about where Judah lost his wife. He became a widow. And it kind of sets up the narrative for basically, what seems to me, it starts to set up the narrative for what he's about ready to do. Because he's not married anymore. He's lost his wife, which goes to this point of like, what do men do in these kind of circumstances? And how is it sanctioned by culture or society? And so I wonder, obviously there was no shame in a sense of when he sent his servant to go find these belongings to him. They were looking for a temple, a Qedesha. So it seems to be speaking like implicitly here. And I think to your point is what the point you're trying to make is that that there were 2 different kinds of prostitutions going on, maybe. One was kind of sanctioned and one was not.
I mean, I don't think any of it's, I think it's all perfectly legal and perfectly fine. One was sacred and one was secular. It's the way I would describe it.
I mean, wasn't there going to be some kind of, in that story, when she's found out to be a prostitute, what was the...
Oh, yeah, they were going to kill her, but
they were ready to kill her.
No
so
shame for the men.
There was a punishment that was coming for her for not being a sacred
one.
No,
you're right about that. Yeah. If she had been a Zona, that would have gotten her killed. But if she's a Qedesha, and somehow it's for reasons that are not explained, that was available to her as a cultural option to put on that veil. Didn't say she go out and snatch the veil. It said, that she had that veil, and that was something that was culturally part of her cultural background. That was, we don't know the circumstances, the context to it, but she was allowed to do that.
And he was too, evidently. Judah was evidently to do that. Another thing that's interesting about this is just a few chapters in front of that is there's a prophecy made about Judah, about the one of his sons would be the so-called expectation of the nations, which gets into the whole messianic lineage of the Messiah will come from this particular man.
Yeah,
and
it's
so
exactly.
this story
That's a point I
right
make
here
in the
comes
article.
from
Is
a
that
Qedesha, from
there's
a,
got to be a
a
Qedesha
priest
somewhere
wife.
in the line.
Yeah. So, or not a priest wife, but like someone who's mimicking as a Qedesh. It is in the lineage of Christ, not just
Exactly.
her, but even the harlot of Rahab, of Jericho.
Right.
So these are
We'll talk
interesting
about
things.
Rahab. We'll have a bit on Rahab when we get there. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yes, I noticed that for sure, that there is a Qedesha in the line of Jesus Christ, the line of David and Solomon and Jesus, and that this is like, a blessing that's there, that's hidden, a blessing of the goddess, hidden in the text, that people never paid attention to, but it's there. That's how I read it for sure.
So I guess when going through the story, I understood that they wanted to burn her because she had gotten pregnant outside of the family, the patriarchal family. So is that like, what is it, kind of a both and situation?
Maybe it's that too. That, maybe that's what saves her, is that obviously she's got, the identification of Judah. So there's that too. Yep.
That's how I understood it.
What we also have to think about is like the point you read it somewhere there, where the temple prostitutes were educated in the arts of abortion potions, or somehow hacking into the female body so they don't get pregnant. And so that kind of knowledge assisted them in their work, I'm sure, which would later be looked at and frowned upon, obviously.
And we do have references from the ancient world of abortion potions.
Yeah.
They definitely did exist.
They still do.
Yeah.
Still do. So those same plants are still around. You can still whip up those same concoctions.
Yeah, women's wisdom hasn't left, even as much as they've tried to erase it.
The corollary to that, Onan, and there is a huge backstory of Onan. I mean, if there's any man in the Old Testament who has like one verse said about him, yet gets repeated 1,000,000 times more, later in
like that cameo character who way outlives his.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's this guy. I mean, the church would later use his name, onanism, to describe masturbation or spilling the seed of any kind, which would afflict serious conscious affliction upon Christians through the ages, where they thought they were sinning against God, extreme forms of wickedness, to where like it really bound the consciousness of Christian boys all through the centuries.
Right. Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
so many stories of this that I think has led to a lot of the psychosis that we see in society. I mean, trying to keep little boys thinking that they're not going to hell if they're spilling their seed when they're going through maturation is quite abusive
stuff. It's pretty abusive stuff.
It's abusive stuff.
And absolutely.
Anyway, the thing with Onan there, the church would later talk about it was spilling the seed, but really what the sin, when you read the story, it was about him not raising up a child to his brother.
Right.
But yet it gets the focus gets put on the sexual act rather than him doing an act of service for his brother according to the laws of that time, right?
So Michael, did you want to say anything? Or you and Tony? You guys have been quiet. You're welcome to pipe in.
Let me turn my mic on here. Nothing in particular. I'm just learning. If I have a curiosity, it would be the etymology, or like how the word was used. Those two words were used in a historical context. I mean, you hear prostitute, but what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean that's the heart of the debate. Like this, the Zona versus the Qedesha. I mean, I stumbled into this stuff because I started doing word searches. I was using BibleHub.com, which is an online Bible where you can word search by the Hebrew. And so I was just word searching for Qedesha. That's how I stumbled into this story. And I word searched for Asheron. That's how I wrote the History of the Goddess book. And so, yeah, I totally was like, what the heck? Like the holy ones. And it just like, I was just like, totally blew my mind. I'm not the first person to, feminists have understood this for a while. I stumbled into something that feminists have been talking about, but, it was still like a total, like head spinning thing to see this, holy ones, prostitute, holy ones, prostitute. And it really, yeah, I'm struggling to put into words like how that reaction was when I first stumbled into that, just, back when I was writing History of the Goddess in 2019. That like, wow, we really are sold this weird bill of goods, like when we're taught to read the Bible in church. And it's just like there's this whole other thing going on that we're just not taught. And
so when they say in the Bible that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, is that the word Qedesha as well?
So no, that's all. New Testament is not in Hebrew; it's all in Greek.
Yeah.
And they never actually call her a prostitute in the Bible. That was just a Christian tradition.
Okay.
What they do say about her is that she had 7 demons taken out of her. That
Yes.
is in the Gospels, and I think that could be an allusion to the pagan traditions. But it's it's an allusion to it. It's not a. But then the thing of calling her a prostitute, that came from some pope early on.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another case where there's so much talk and sort of people saying and making up maybe or maybe coming across stories and information that seem to validate her role as a priestess. And like even that she had ties to Egypt, or like, she was a priestess of Isis. There's a lot of this kind of talk that's going on, and a lot of people trying to, bring in information and different kinds of things that they say are some of the proof that she was a priestess. So, like how, I don't know if maybe some of that also comes from her gospel and the Nag Hammadi scrolls, for what we do have access to, that was her words and what she said and shared, that, and then her role also as Yeshua's consort. What did Michael write there?
Yeah, I just noticed that there's a chat here. I didn't even see it before. Yeah, Mike, your comment. How much of these myths are fantasy constructed by modern sex positive spirituality, and how much of it is actually born out of scholarship? So, I mean, the accusation is that all this temple prostitution is made up by the lurid imaginations of Middle Ages, repressed Christian men. And then you've got another thing of like the wild imaginations of New Age, feminists, and you've got, wild imaginations of guys like me. So it's, I mean, the finer points are a mystery. The finer points are definitely an enigma. We only know enough about the Qedesha to know that they existed and to know they were special in some regard, but we just don't know. And that's what makes it so intriguing. Yeah, I don't know those books, Michael. You didn't say this stuff out loud.
Yeah. Join the conversation, Michael.
Okay, fine. Yeah, Tarnsmen of Gore, like just a bunch of, tribal rape and, captive slave fantasies. They were, fantasy books from the 70s that occurred, concurrently with a really progressive period in American politics. So I don't know. I kind of find those two things to be, they kind of tend to coincide.
Well, that whole culture I think you're describing is definitely seized on the Qedesha since like the 70s, I think that
probably since Osho came to the United States and started his cult.
You think Osho? Yeah. You think Osho has something to do with it?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, I think the more popular kind of idea of, like the sacred sexuality movements and stuff. I think that his work and that cult itself, I think, had a lot, should take a lot of responsibility, holds a lot of responsibility for sort of helping these ideas to spread, especially here in the U.S. and especially because of the time frame that all took place.
Do you know this book, When God Was a Woman, by Merlin Stone?
I know of it, but I've not read it.
Yeah,
So this is from, I highly recommend it. It's a oldie but goodie. It's from the 70s. And she was like this totally independent scholar, totally pre-internet days, doing all this organic research, traveling around to museums and running down the goddess stuff. And she really nailed it. Like, for what the information that was available at the time, this woman just like totally crushed it. This book is amazing. And it was one of the first books I found when I started getting into this research, and they really kind of laid things out for me. And she must talk about the Qedesha too in here, I'm sure. That's probably where I really started hearing about it, was from her. And she, she doesn't learn everything. I think there's a lot more beyond what Merlin Stone writes, but she really, the stuff she does right, I think she really killed it. And it was really an awesome job. Yeah, I forget where I was going with that, but highly recommend this book. In terms of like the feminism of the new age feminism of the counterculture that comes out, out of the 70s and the 60s and 70s and the hippies. Yeah, those folks, like the second wave feminists, this book was really popular with a certain crowd. And that's where all the revival of Tantra in the West and this is the new age spirituality really, it's kind of ebbed and flowed since the 70s. And I think it's kind of back on the rise again.
Michael, I saw your comment. I just learned recently about that book through a podcast. I don't know if I'm going to take the time to read it, but it's very interesting. And like you bringing up that book, yeah, really dense, I'm sure. You bringing up that book, the alphabet versus the goddess, or it's something like that. That's a heavy thing. And and I understand it's like a lot of like history, and it's probably tough to wade through and not as like that interesting to really keep you in there. But I think it goes to what Ed was saying too, that, as somebody who studied women's studies and feminism and has a degree in that, as well as a degree in religion. Okay, so yeah, you have the book, but
there's a 1 hour lecture on YouTube you can watch of his that'll do the whole thing in 1 hour, which I highly recommend.
That sounds like the way to go. Thank you. But the idea that language and like history and writing and the way that things are now like handed down, and like the writing, the telling of history has been historically done by men, whereas oral stories, traditions, those kinds of things, the ritual, the so on, it was passed down orally through women. So it's a very different approach. Plus, like, women were more likely to like gather and show each other how to do things and take care of each other. And that was kind of part of how we pass along wisdom historically and in ancient times. Whereas then, other things come into play, and the next thing you know, Christianity, and only men were able or allowed for the longest time to write or to have language or to learn to read and all of that. So I'm sure that that's covered in that book.
Oh no, I got this one. This is another I highly recommend. Alphabet versus the Goddess. And this guy is making the argument that he was a brain surgeon, and he noticed that that literacy tracks with patriarchy throughout history. And the more literate the culture was, the nastier they treated their women. And he associated with being left brain versus right brain. And that literacy is a left brain thing when it goes to your right hand, left brain. Whereas the right brain is your big picture, holistic. And that's where all your art is right brained. Literacy is left brain. And all the women's goddess cultures are all artistic and not literate. and the patriarchal God cultures are literate and not artistic. He makes a lot of brilliant points. One of the points is that right at the very top of the 10 Commandments is you shall not make graven images, and to smash all the idols, because these idols are like art, and the art is like telling a story, and they don't want the art to tell the stories. They want the literature. They want the written word to tell the story. And because that focuses on the left brain, and that's more patriarchal, and God takes you to God, and the right brain is the art and takes you to goddess. And that's you have to listen to this guy's whole thing. And if you find Leonard Schlain, Shlain, Alphabet versus the Goddess, you can find it on
You said YouTube?
there's a lecture on YouTube. He was not like an academic. It's like one lecture he gave. It's an hour long. Summed up the whole book. He also makes the point that as we're shifting now to the digital age and getting more imagery back into our communications, that's part of what's bringing the goddess back. It's all going hand in hand. That the more video oriented, the more visually oriented we are, that's going to lean towards matriarchal goddess stuff, and writing stuff down in literature is going to be more left brained and more patriarchal side, which I think is totally fascinating.
Well, dude, I got to
That's
chime
incredible.
in there. Call me a
That's
woman,
incredible.
because I'm all about the imagery versus the writing for sure. And I had to chime in here to put my 25 cents in, because it's certainly more than 2 cents. First of all, any of you aren't reading the chat from Michael, it's hilarious. Thank you, Michael. And the 3 or 4 of you are like riffing along so well. I really, when Ed prompted for Tony G and Michael to make a comment, the only comment I really felt completely compelled to make is give it up for Joshua Vanderplot. Your early instigations in the conversation were fantastic, especially coming from a man that looks like he's a Viking bearded king on his throne right now. I mean, Jesus, I got it blown up on my phone so I can get the full view here, Vanderplot. That was fantastic. I expected nothing less than the author knowing dear Lisa here.
Well,
And
Joshua
I
can
was
join
just-
our divorced men's Gen X club.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There we go. There we
How
go,
about just
baby. Gen
divorced
X divorced men
people?
who want the goddess back.
Yeah.
So fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. You all are doing a marvelous job. This is by far one of the most entertaining of the goddess Bible studies. And with that, I just want to go back and keep watching what you're doing and reading what Michael is posting. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, so I wanted to add to this. I put this in the chat. Part of the problem I have with like the alphabet versus the goddess and like some other things is like I've read a lot of conflicting stuff about whether older societies were matriarchal, and the idea that there is this like less barbaric past that we can somehow like harken back to and return to. Like I kind of have a little bit of resistance to that because it feels almost like fantastical as opposed to something that I've really seen evidence of in a lot of cases. And I'm open to hearing that evidence. I just am not.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. And in fact, a lot of the academics are coming where you are. And they're really, it is important to recognize that people are people, and that there is no society where like everybody is like super nice to everybody. I don't think that ever existed, but we have plenty of examples of very clear matriarchies, and because it's a function of family structure. And I learned it from the Native Americans, and they were by no means like all like perfectly peaceful and like idyllic. They were people. They had plenty of fighting and conflict, but matriarchy really has to do with family structure. And when you build your family through the female bloodlines, there's two things, and academics are very clear on this: matrilineal, matrifocal, egalitarian, and cooperative. That's what they say. There's lots of societies, but they don't want to call them matriarchies. I'm calling them matriarchies, because what happens when you build your family lines through the woman, that means you don't need to constrain the women's sex lives. And this is a very important dynamic. because when you have patriarchy, you're controlling for paternity. And so the entire society needs to be structured around controlling women and controlling women's sexuality. Secondly is the matrifocal marriage, which is where the man goes and lives with the woman's family, as opposed to the woman going to live with the man's family. What we had with Judah and Tamar is a patriarchal marriage where the woman went and lived with the man's family. But there's alternatives where the man goes and lives with the woman's family, and the bloodlines are all being tracked through the mothers, and the women never leave home. They stay with their multi-generations of aunties and grandma and sisters and cousins. And if it's a happy marriage, then that's great with the man. But if it's an unhappy marriage, they kick the man out. He goes home and the woman stays put. And she is not in the position of Tamar. Tamar is an example of what happens when a woman's in a patriarchal household, but situation goes south and situation goes badly for her. She's screwed, which is what we see right in the modern day, where women get screwed in patriarchal marriages when it's an unhappy marriage. So when it's an unhappy marriage and a matriarchal marriage, the women are protected. And then this in turn breeds more cooperation and egalitarianism in the society. But it's not that they don't have warriors, because the women breed warriors. The women want their men to be mighty warriors. They want them to defend them. So it's not that they don't still fight, but they are more cooperative. They do tend to be more egalitarian. They do tend to be more sexual and more friendly than societies that are strictly patriarchal and control all the women. Because the whole building block of society is this control structure that's rooted in the family and then bricked out from there.
But I want to recommend, I haven't read it yet. It's once I finish the book I'm on now, I'm skipping over to this next one. It's called Before War, and it's by Alicia Deva. And it's on marriage, hierarchy, and our matriarchal origins. But the description, and part of how I heard about this was on a podcast, but she does take a more scholarly approach. So she draws on evidence from anthropology, archaeology, linguistics, primatology, and genetics data that tells more about matrilineal societies and ancient religions that, I don't know if you've come across her or her work, Ed, but I think the two of you are on the same wavelength with thinking, but that's what she's talking about in this book. So that's going to be my next read after I finish what I'm on now. And I think it would probably be of interest to Michael, if this is something that you're looking into.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the topics where I have a real axe to grind with today's academics, because they are, the current crop of academics right now are saying there's no such thing as a matriarchy, and like, yes, it's matrilineal, matrifocal, egalitarian, and cooperative, but don't call it a matriarchy. And I'm like, you people, like, that's a definition of matriarchy. So there's a bunch of issues in today's academia that really bother me, and that's one of them. That's a minor one compared to some of the other issues.
Ed, I'd just like to circle back on that comment you made regarding, the written word being attributed more to the patriarchy and the oral being made more matriarchal. And I find it, as I'm thinking about that, when you look at the oral traditions, like even within the church, you have the written word and then you have tradition. And it's interesting that a lot of the traditions of that I would consider to be more that put an emphasis on the feminine. For example, like Mary's presentation to the temple when she's young. This comes from the Proto-Evangelium of James, where she's a temple. She's at I think it's at 2 or 3 years old. She's presented at the temple, and she enters the temple to be a temple virgin. Many people don't know this, but this is actually a part of the Orthodox faith. It's in the festival schedule of the church, where she's a temple. Mary is a temple virgin. She's dedicated.
Mother Mary. Huh? That's definitely not in the Protestant traditions.
No, it's not. But she has a feast
Amen.
day. The
Amen.
feast day.
I've been saying this since we started this conversation. That's got to be the case.
Yeah, so she's actually one of these. They won't want to call it a temple prostitute, but she was a priestess. She was dedicated by her parents, whose names were Joachim and Anna. And what's also interesting about this is that, you know, these are stories that are they're in the tradition of the church. People read them. The women read them, but they're never discussed on the pulpits, but they are in the books. They're even in the feast day schedule. So here again, I see this thing where it's like the oral tradition, but it's not in the written word, and it's not a part of the dogmas of the church, but it's the things that the mothers are talking to their kids about. It's what they're whispering all through these probably the ages, and something that the Orthodox priests, you know, like, oh, you know, it's there. We've accepted it by sheer force, probably because of the pious females throughout the centuries, but it's there. And what's also interesting is in some of those what we would call apocryphal works is that it's those teachings that she got, which was in the temple from a young age all the way until she came out, that she taught to Christ. I mean, the story goes in, it's such a fantastic story because when she's presented to the temple, Zechariah, who's the father of John the Baptist, is said to have ushered her into the Holy of Holies. Now, I'm not making this up. This is
Jesus,
This
man,
is
where has this been
I don't
at
know
my
this
whole
story.
life?
this is
Vanderplot?
in the writings of the Greek Orthodox Church has this in their writings. They're apocryphal writings. You can find it in the Proto-Evangelium of James, I think it is.
What?
Yes, this is
How are
true.
you seriously the first person or source that I've ever heard cite this? And I've been
Well,
saying it the whole
I-
time. Ed and Lisa can justify. The second I heard temple prostitute virgins, I was like, dang, Jesus.
So,
Jesus.
and are
Yeah,
you finding this? Can you like send us a link in the signal chat so that we can all take a look at like the same thing?
Yeah, I see. I found a link to it here.
Okay.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it says that she was like 2 or 3 years old. Her parents bring her up to like the steps of the temple, and she miraculously walks up the temple to the temple steps. And Zechariah is inspired to just bring her into the Holy of Holies, which, you know, to anybody who's listening to this, that was not allowed except for one day a year. You know, these are stories for the, you know, for the patriarchal side of the church. They're thinking, no, this is crazy stuff. But what I'm saying is it's in the lore. It's actually built into the festivals of the church. This is a very subtle point I'm trying to make here.
Yep.
It's not in
Yeah.
the dogma of the church.
I
It's
got
in
it.
the
I got it.
festivals of the church.
Yep.
And when you study the festivals of the church, it's in those stories.
Yes. The same way Ed has been decoding goddesses for marijuana in the Bible. Like, you got to read the subtlety to know, but when you do, it's like bang, right there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see this, but it says right here, the birth of Mary, the Holy Mother of God, and the very glorious Mother of Jesus Christ, the Proto-Evangelium of James. I'll have to read this.
Yeah.
Looks a little too heavy to read, right?
Oh, it's
I think we
thick
got our
stuff.
headline. I think we got our
But
headline.
these writings actually formed the festivals of the church. They didn't make it into the canon of stuff. The canon of the church, the what we have in the 26 books of the New Testament. But these were books that were read, and they had huge influence. And I think the matriarchal tone in these books is there.
Dang.
You know.
That's
But
brilliant,
it's
man.
still not
Love that.
enough, in my opinion. It doesn't go far enough. I mean, but you can still see that impulse in us that wants to bring that forward.
That's brilliant. That's a great contribution.
Seriously,
It is.
This is a drop the mic episode right now.
Well, you never really hear about the Orthodox Church in the United States. I mean, like,
Yeah.
there's hardly any people practicing that who are, you know, quote, Christian or Catholic or whatever. Like, you don't hear about it. And it's also not commonly taught when you go to study, you know, like Christianity and the history of Christianity, whatever. There's too much to look at. There's too much to study. There's just too much. So you just never hear about anything
Well,
like that.
also
Yeah.
part of that, Lisa and Tony, is that the Protestants were super hostile to the Virgin Mary. One
Yeah.
of the main things that the Protestants did in the Protestant Reformation was smash the Virgin Mary left, right, and center. Get rid of that pagan goddess, you Catholics, a bunch of just pagans. Get rid of her. They were super hostile. That's my big criticism of I was raised Protestant. My big criticism of the Protestants is they went exactly the wrong direction in the Virgin Mary. We need to go the other direction. We need to put her back in the Trinity where she belongs.
I mean, Ed, you can, if you can do this, you might be able to pull up an image. If you just take any major cathedral or anything in the Orthodox Church, the largest, most overpowering icon that you'll find in an Orthodox church is directly above the altar. It fills up the whole apse, and it is Mary, the Mother of God. She's going like this. Her hands are up as a temple priest, like a priestess,
right.
hovering over the altar. She's absolutely huge. Sometimes I mean, by 100 times order of magnitude, they're enormous. Sometimes in mosaics, sometimes just painted. But she was considered the Ark of the Covenant because she had Christ inside her womb. So she was considered to be, she was the Hagia Sophia, you know?
Let me see if I can get this.
Dude, Joshua, like, how do you know about this?
Well, I was an Orthodox priest, so I studied these things for years. And
wow. Okay.
yeah, so this is kind of just my background.
Right on.
Yeah, there you go. And that's a small one. Now that's a small one.
Right.
But that's what you have there. She is directly right over the altar, looking right down on, and not only this, but see, in the Eucharist, the flesh of Christ, that, understand that when the Christians do this, they can't say this and they don't make these connections. And I'm sorry to say it, but there you go. There's another one. When they're taking the body of Christ, that's the body that came from the mother, from the Virgin Mary. The whole doctrinal thing of salvation in Christianity is about Christ, God taking on the matter, the mother, and sanctifying all of human flesh. But in Orthodox Christianity, it has a dictum of God became man, became part of woman, took the woman's flesh so that man might become God. That is the Orthodox view of salvation, not the Roman Catholic or the Protestant view. It's a totally different doctrine of the church that it never gets spoken about, never gets talked about in mainstream.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. Wait a minute. We process this.
In Orthodox theology, it's not about just Jesus dying on the cross. It's called theosis. It's a doctrine of deification where God became a man, took the human nature of it in order to deify it and sanctify all of matter. Now, I think I have a philosophical problem with this still, but it's light years ahead of what we've been dealing with in the Western mindset for a long time. That's denigrated matter, that makes matter feel evil, or sin. It's a embodiment of evil in a sense that we have to throw off. Well, in the theosis, in the deification schema of salvation that's held in the Greek Orthodox churches, is that when God became matter, all matter became divine. To this moment, actually right now, because Christ deified the flesh, whether you're a pagan, whether you're a Christian, doesn't matter. All of flesh has been deified. But you enter into that mystery, according to the church, through baptism, taking on that image, and then communing in the church. But the soteriology, of the church is that Christ has sanctified all, believe it or not, through that act of taking on human nature from the Virgin Mary.
Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh
and
my
so
God.
she's called mediatrix and all that stuff. Now the Roman Catholics went too far. They made her this is what's so strange, is they made her Immaculate Conception. People think the Immaculate Conception is about Christ's conception. No, they immaculately conceived her in Geochemanana, that she was conceived without sin. That it's not, the Immaculate Conception doctrine is not about Jesus Christ. It's about Mary.
What?
Most people don't know this. Look it up right now. Look it up. The Immaculate Conception is not about his conception on the Virgin in Christmas time. It's about the conception of Mary in her mother's womb, which was Anna. It's not Christ.
I mean, I have heard that Mary was also, the Mother Mary was also had her own immaculate
She was
conception.
immaculately conceived. Otherwise, the immaculate doesn't mean anything if it's a virgin birth. She was immaculately conceived because they say she was singularly picked out from the human nature, not to be born with original sin, because they have that original sin doctrine, that she was immaculately conceived in order to hold the creator and the master of all, Jesus Christ. She was taken out. So they have to do it because the West has an original sin doctrine that Augustine implemented in the West, and it's in the Protestant churches. It's not so much in the Orthodox churches. There's still an element there. All fell with Adam, but it doesn't have this root of like concupiscence that Augustine like implanted in the church brain, and it's flowered into what it is now.
So Joshua, then if
sorry,
if
I'm
all matter,
Fascinating stuff, man.
okay.
If all matter is made, divine in that case, to me, I mean, I'm pagan, but I really call myself an animist. So I wholly believe that everything of nature, like everything that's sort of like natural matter, if you will, is divine. Like it's all God, So I kind of feel like it's a similarity,
I have two thoughts on this, and I don't know which one is right. I don't know if the theology of the Orthodox Church was trying through this mythos, trying to revive this belief that all of matter is divine, all of life is divine, because it's always been there, and they needed a story to revive it, because stories tend to do this, or the side of Christ, this was a real story, that this Christ did become man, and because he completely united humanity with divinity, people like yourself, all pagan cultures, whatever, whether they know it or not, are operating in the energy of that, whether they know Christ brought that back to the world or not. That was an incarnational.
That. I mean, if there was some sort of divine force that created everything, to me, that's like, I mean, it's the spark of divinity, and I feel like Yeshua, the man, the teacher, because I don't believe in a Christ or a savior, that what he was trying to tell everybody is like, this divinity that's in me, it's in all of us. Like, right. I feel like that was the point of that. But to me, it's always been divine. I mean, that's what people were practicing and understood for thousands of years before all of this came up. And then the church, if the Orthodox Church was like, here's how we bring it all together, great. But this idea that it wasn't until this one person, I never in my life could ever believe that.
Right. Yeah. So I hear you, Lisa, because like in the West, like what I was taught was like the material world has fallen, and that the material world is like sinful, and that if you want to like be pure, you have to like do transcendence and get with God and meditate and pray and all that. So I've always been attracted, like you, Lisa. I've always been attracted to the idea that the material world is also quite sacred. And so when I understood the mother is matter, it was like it clicked for me instantly. I've never been exposed to these Greek Orthodox perspectives. It's very interesting. One thing I want to add in, that this imagery, what it reminds me of is Isis and Horus.
Oh, yes.
Egypt, because Horus was the pharaoh, and he's the son. But Isis was the throne upon which the pharaoh sat. And so she was always depicted in this same kind of manner, where she's like enveloping, or or Horus is sitting on her lap, or a bunch of different ways they presented it. But it's a very similar way where she is the dominant figure. Isis was always the dominant figure. In the Egyptian
you can
culture.
pull up an icon, Ed. Look up Christ enthroned. She is the throne, and it's the exact replica of what you're talking about in Egypt. It was lifted right out of there.
Well, they definitely took the exact same statues and literally
Yeah.
like, and just like changed the name.
Yeah.
In fact,
No, there's no doubt. There's no doubt about it.
I think that people who are like, you know, hardcore like fundamentalists, if they would just open their minds a little bit and learn some of these things and learn some of this background, their minds and hearts would be open. They would have most likely a more rich experience and understanding of all of these things they say they believe. You know, I mean, I just really feel like they would be so enriched in their religious beliefs and in their practices if they took any time or interest in any of those.
Well,
I think
from a standpoint of people that probably take a time and interest in connecting with the land and cycles and family, you'll take a quick look around. Hey kids, you're on stage. We have found our ways to just an amazing place, and I need to call an end to being with you and the goddess celebration today. But Ed, fantastic. Audience, marvelous. Please come back again next week. This was everything it was meant to be and more. So much fun.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Yeah, it's getting late. I think I should wrap it up too. But it's been a fantastic conversation, and Joshua, you're fantastic. Definitely come back.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you for having me, Ed. Thanks for the invitation.
And thank you. This is awesome.
Keep it going, brother. We're just getting warmed up.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Joshua. And thank you, Michael, as well, if you're listening. He dropped off before, but everybody's invited back. So great talk tonight.
Thanks,
Edward Dodge.substack.com if you want to get on the mailing list. We have a signal chat if anyone's interested. goddessbiblestudy@gmail.com if anyone needs to email me. And please like and subscribe and all that jazz. All right. Till next time. Thank you, guys. All right. The stream should be over.